Hi, everyone, and welcome back. We are excited for today's session, and I'm excited to introduce our great colleague from SUNY Purchase, Jarima DeWeese, who is going to convene today's session.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this amazing session. My name is Jarima DeWeese, preferred pronouns she, her, hers. I am the Chief Diversity Officer, Title IX Coordinator, Affirmative Action Officer, and ADA Compliance Officer at Purchase College. So we have a very exciting presentation for you from our Purchase College alumna, Robyn Ochs. Hi, Robyn. So I'll just give a brief introduction of Robyn and let her take it away thereafter. So Robyn is an educator, speaker, grassroots activist, and editor of Bi Women Quarterly and 2 anthologies, the 42 Country Collection. Getting by voices of bisexuals around the world and recognizing the voices of bisexual men. Robyn's writings have been published in numerous bi, women's studies, multicultural, LGBTQ+ anthologies, and she has taught courses on LGBTQ+ history and politics in the United States, Canada, abroad, and the politics of sexual orientation and experiences of those who transgress the binary categories of gray, straight, masculine, feminine, Black, white, and/or male, female. In addition to being named by Teen Vogue as one of 9 bisexual women who are making history, and she was chosen to represent Massachusetts on the Advocate's 50 States, 50 Heroes list. Robyn is the recipient of numerous awards. Most recently, Campus Pride's Voice and Action Award, the Bisexual Resource Center's Community Leadership Award, the PFLAG Brenda Howard Award, the National LGBT Task Force Susan J. Hyde Activism Award, and the Harvard Gender Sexuality Caucus Lifetime Achievement Award. Robyn, in addition to being an alumna of Purchase College, is deeply committed to intersectional sustainable activism, to working with others to build coalitions across identities and across social movements, to supporting emerging leaders and learning and growing. Robyn is an activist for more than 50 years so far, and she's definitely in it for the long haul. So now I turn it over to Robyn, who will get us going on this amazing presentation.
Thank you so much, Jarima. That was awesome. So my name is Robyn Ochs, and I go by she and they pronouns, and I have identified as bisexual now for 44 years and about 10 months. In fact, I came out as bi to myself during my very first month at Purchase. Purchase did it to me. We'll blame Purchase, or we'll credit Purchase. Yay, and I see there's another Purchase alum here, yay. Anyway, this program is, we only have 1 hour, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go into some slides, I'm gonna do some presentation. There will be interactive parts of it, and I'm going to try to go efficiently enough through the slides so that we can have time at the end for more open Q&A, comments, questions, and thoughts. So here we go. Screen sharing has failed to start. Let me try again.
And just while you troubleshoot that, I'm just going to interrupt. Our captions aren't working right now, and I'm not sure why, but we want to obviously make sure that it is accessible to all. So if we could maybe get a test from Danielle, our captioner, while we work on troubleshooting that, I will give you your time back, but we're going to try and troubleshoot this quickly.
I'll just read all the little comments in the chat. Hello, person from Wisconsin. and New Hampshire. Just tell me when it's time to start. Andrew wrote, shout out to all my fellow bis out there. Feels amazing to see the representation and be able to attend this. And hello, Will. BC. I hope it's okay that I make these kinds of comments while we're waiting to start. Queens College, CUNY. York College, CUNY.
All right, it looks like they're working now. Our auto transcriptionist is working, so you can go ahead.
Okay, here we go. So I'm going to get back that time, correct? Every second matters.
Of course.
Okay, I'm going to hold you to that. So, and by the way, thanks to all the folks who organized the conference. This is a massive, massive undertaking, and I really appreciate your creativity and all the time you put into it. And I know oftentimes we forget to compliment people on the work they do around conferences. We instead just go up to them and say, I wish you had done more of this, or you didn't do enough of that. But I really appreciate every single thing that you have done, because it is a massive, massive, huge, huge job. So thank you. Okay, here, let's go. So just a quick look at the learning objectives. We're going to do a little bit of terminology, definition work. We're going to focus on some specific challenges faced by BI+ young adults. We're going to do some data, talking about some current data on health disparities and risk factors. And then we're going to go into a more positive place where we identify ways to support BI+ young adults. So first thing, who are we talking about today? We're not just talking about the word bisexual, though we are also talking about the word bisexual, because there are many, many different identities that people use to describe sexualities either between or outside of the gay straight binary. Some of the more commonly used identities include, queer, pansexual, fluid, same gender loving. There's also gayish, straightish, heteroflexible, homoflexible. Some people don't use labels at all. So many different words. And every single one of these words is the best word for some people. And I just want to start by acknowledging that I love all the words, and I fully respect people's choice of what word to use. So this program is more about the space than the specific word. It's hard to think about inclusive language in this regard, because if I used every single word in every single sentence, we'd have a 4-hour program. So sometimes I talk about BI+ identities. When I do that, the plus is real. The plus is real. The plus is meant to indicate that there are lots of other also equally valid identities. Sometimes I talk about non-binary sexualities, and sometimes I use the term multi-sexualities. But whatever I talk about, whatever word I use, and even if I just say bi, I'm more talking about a range of identity space than any specific label. And in fact, there are a lot of words. This is actually data from the Trevor Project, which did a survey of many thousands of high school age young people. And one thing that they learned from their study, they asked people about their sexual orientation or sexual identity, but they didn't have a multiple choice question. They had a fill in the blank question. And the young people provided more than 100 different labels. So when I say plus, that plus is enormous. Another challenge of identifying as bisexual is that most people don't have the same definition of it as do people who actually identify as bi. So this is my definition of bisexuality, and it's one that's used by most of the BI+ people who I know and who are in any way connected with BI+ community online or in person. So bisexuals are people who acknowledge in themselves the potential to be attracted romantically and or sexually to people of more than one gender, not necessarily at the same time, in the same way, or to the same degree. So it's a very big, broad definition. I'm going to show you a little bit of population data because I think the population data can tell us a very interesting story. So this is Gallup data. And this is a question that they added to their survey, their telephone surveys in 2012, which was, do you personally identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender? The actual numbers are less important than the picture that it paints. So in 2012, 3.5% of the respondents said yes. And by the way, I don't think these are actually the numbers of people who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. I believe that these numbers represent the number of people comfortable telling a stranger on the telephone that they do. So in 2012, it was 3.5%. The number goes up every single year until by 2020, it's 5.6%. So this tells us that a lot more people are comfortable saying yes. When you break it out by age, it gets really, really interesting. And again, you don't need to memorize the numbers. I think the picture is much more important. The lowest line is the oldest people, basically people born between World War I and World War II. For that group, it's 1.something%. For the next generation, which is boomers, it's 2.something%. For the next generation, which is Gen X, it's 3.something%. Are we seeing a clear pattern yet? Yes, we are. If we go to the next generation, millennials, it gets even more interesting because for millennials, it's 5.8% in 2012. It goes up every single year. And by 2020, it's 9.1%. So that number shoots up. And then finally, in the upper right-hand corner of this graph, there's a little bit of Gen Z because it's the part of Gen Z that's old enough to make it into the Gallup study. 15.9%. So 1 in 6 folks in Gen Z answered yes to that question. Now, just for the bi-identified folks, and by the way, they didn't give people the chance to identify as anything else other than straight, lesbian, gay, or bi. So for the bi-identified folks, the numbers are shooting up dramatically. For the traditionalists, for the oldest folks, it's 0.3% identified as bi. For Gen X, it's 1.8%. For millennials, it's 5.1%. For Gen Z, it's 11.5%. So again, dramatic generational changes. Now, what if instead of asking people how they identify, instead of saying, what are you? What if we ask people, where are you? What if we ask them to locate themselves on a sexuality continuum? Fortunately, YouGov did just this. They asked people to locate themselves on a sexuality continuum with 0. It's basically a Kinsey scale, with 0 being attracted to, they would have said opposite sex or gender only. I don't say the word opposite when talking about sex or gender, so I say different or other. And 6 being attracted to same only. So this chart is broken out by age. On the right is the oldest group of respondents, the people who are 55 plus. For that group, 84% of the respondents put themselves on the straightest of the numbers. 7% put themselves on the gayest of the numbers. And only 7% total put themselves on all the other 5 numbers combined. So that's a very binary construction. If we go over to the left and look at our millennials, 18 to 34-year-olds, it looks really different. Just over half put themselves on the straightest of the numbers, 55%. 3% put themselves on the gayest of the numbers. And the number in the middle, the percentage of folks in the middle numbers increases almost 5-fold so that it's now a full third of the respondents. So what we're seeing again is the younger you are, the less binary you are, even in where you would put yourself. And again, this question has nothing to do with identity words. We don't know how these people identify. We just know where they're telling us they identify. What about folks who are even younger? Luckily, the CDC, as many of you know, does a study every 2 years called the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance Study, the YRBS study. And in 2015, for the very first time, they added a sexual orientation question. And just as an aside, this is really important to have this question because this question helps us understand, number one, what the prevalence is of folks who identify as sexual minorities in the population, in the high school population. It also gives us a tool to look at disparities, because if we don't have this question, we can't answer the question, how are lesbian, gay, bisexual youth doing compared to heterosexual youth? How are gay male youth doing compared to lesbian youth, et cetera? So the question is really, really important. It's my understanding that this was a really big thing to get this question on the survey, because there are still a lot of people in this country who believe that if we don't ask young people questions about their sexuality, then they won't think about their sexuality. And that if we do ask young people questions about their sexuality, they will all suddenly turn gay and start having gay sex. I see some people laughing, thank you. I think it's just like a silly, silly, silly thing, but I think it's a very prevalent, unfortunately, a pretty common misunderstanding of the experience of young people. Anyway, they finally got this question, but if you notice, there is no gender identity question here, and that's because they don't have one. It's my understanding that they were working on a question for the 2017 survey, but something happened in November of 2016, and that question was never added. Anyway, here we go. Here's what they found. And by the way, this is a pretty poorly worded question as well. I showed every young person I've shown this to has said at least 3 things about it. One, where are all the other words? I've also heard, why do they explain heterosexual and not the other words? And why do they put heterosexual first? That said, I'm still glad that there was a question, even if it's not a great question. But recognizing that this doesn't actually tell us how young people are identifying specifically, because a lot of people have to try to cram themselves into an imperfect multiple choice question. So in 2015, here's what they found. 89% responded that they identified as heterosexual, straight, 2% gay or lesbian, 6% bisexual, 3.2% not sure. So I personally was actually surprised to see that bisexual was 6% and gay and lesbian was 2%. I was surprised. I did expect it to be the opposite, but I was not displeased when I saw that. 2 years later, same survey, different group of young people. The number of heterosexual, straight identified kids goes down. Gay and lesbian goes up about 10%, bi goes up by a full third, and not sure goes up about 10%. So then I was waiting for the 2019 study, because for me, this is like data Christmas. Like for me, this is the most exciting thing, just to get data and information. And I also wanted to know, sometimes when you see surveys that go over time, there's a lot of up and down. So I thought, was that a blip or is that a more consistent pattern? So when the 2019 survey came out in 2020, I was there, I pounced on it, and here's what it showed. It's not just a blip, it's a pattern. The number of this percentage identifying as heterosexual goes down another percentage point. Gay and lesbian goes up a little tiny bit. Bisexual goes up another 10%. And not sure jumps hugely. And I think that's partly because I think it's holding a lot of other identities of kids who may actually be sure, but their identity isn't listed. So overall, in summary, just what the data is showing me, that the younger you are, the less straight, the less cisgender, meaning identifying with the gender you were assigned at birth, and the less binary you are likely to be. Another thing I want to throw in here is that I believe that how we're using identity is changing. I believe that we're using identities these days more as adjectives than as proper nouns. That we're using identities as terms to describe ourselves. And what that means is that opens up the door for lots of different terms. It also opens up the door for people to identify with multiple different identity words simultaneously. At the beginning, I said that I've identified as bisexual for 44 years. I also now identify as queer, and I also identify as pansexual. So what is it like to identify as bi plus? It's not all sunshine and rainbows. Because there are a lot of stereotypes about bi plus people. There are a lot of stereotypes. In my in-person programs, when we have ample time, I usually ask people to generate their own list. And someone just commented, I've definitely gotten the you'll have sex with anyone stereotype. Yes. And so we generate our own lists. And every single time I've done this, 90 to 95% of the stereotypes have been negative. And I want to ask you all a question now for the chat. So my question is, do you see any common themes in these stereotypes? I'm going to go back to the picture, but very sexualized, needing a binary, negativity, negative, not accepting people where they are, erasure, yes, they were confused or promiscuous, my God, it's going so fast, dismissive, not a real sexuality, not valid, erasing, saying it's just a phase, in denial, judgmental, maybe they'll switch back, sex is going so fast, not part of the community, not supportive, sex shaming, you got it. Just a phase, confused, othered, indecisive, that it's stupid, fear of sex, sexualized, not healthy, lacking morality. Then once you're in a relationship, the relationship of the sex of your partner determines your identity, fear of commitment. Okay, stop. You're overwhelming me with terrible wonderfulness, with wonderful terribleness. Yeah, so it's interesting because people have no trouble thinking of all these stereotypes. And when I came out as bi, I actually came out as bi in my first month at Purchase. And I didn't tell another human being for 5 years. I got stuck in the space between knowing and being. I knew who I was. I knew I was bisexual, but I did not know how to be a bisexual person in this world. I really didn't know how to operationalize my identity. I didn't know what to do after I knew. And one of the things that kept me quiet was all these stereotypes. I knew that if I came out as bi, that I would have to take all this on. And frankly, I was not strong enough or resilient enough to do that. And so what happened for me is I kept quiet during my 4 years at Purchase. And yes, I did graduate in 4 years. During my 4 years at Purchase, I basically suffocated in my own silence. And I did a lot of things to kind of deal with that stress. I drank a lot when I was at Purchase. I was not a happy camper. What happened for me is that after Purchase, I moved to Boston. Actually, a coworker came out to me as bi, and I said it back. She said she was bisexual, and I said, so am I. And that was the first time I ever said it out loud. And it was so amazing and powerful and wonderful and affirming. And I felt like for the first time that I was able to breathe. What happened later is that I started to understand that these stereotypes are actually not caused by bi plus people, that I was not responsible for all these stereotypes, that these stereotypes are caused by limitations in other people's thinking. And a lot of you wrote things in the comments that were spot on. And I'm going to just go through them very, very quickly. I have 5 frames that I think can explain away just about all these stereotypes. Thank you, Liz. I'm glad that purchase helped you to be free. It did to me, but just took a long time to get to get to the end of that. So here are the 5 things. And this is something that y'all commented on in the chat a lot, like discomfort with sexuality. We are part of a culture that is so deeply ambivalent about sex and sexuality. On one hand, we are entirely sexualized. Everything is sexualized. Sex is used to sell everything from hamburgers to deodorant to everything. Like sex is used everywhere. We're constantly sexualized. Everyone's always trying to like partner us. And like that's just part of our culture, this constant sexualization. But on the other hand, we are so deeply uncomfortable with sexuality. And I think this creates this really weird discord or cacophony inside our brains that makes it really hard to see sexuality clearly. And when people think about bisexuality, their minds jump to sex. And people just are very uncomfortable with that. And a lot of the stereotypes about bisexuality, like threesomes, like that we're hypersexual, are not said in a neutral way. They're said in a way that is very judgmental and very negative. So that's one of the things that is very much in the way. Thing number 2, binaries. And again, y'all, some of you mentioned that in the comments as well. Binary thinking is really dangerous. It makes it hard for us to see all kinds of human diversity. And what helped me, I think when I was first coming out as bi, I was like, I kept hearing the framing gay straight, which completely erases bi plus people. And it was really frustrating because I felt like I took it personally. I felt like it was about me, like people trying to erase me. And then I matured a little bit and I thought, oh, why are they trying to erase my people? Why are they trying to erase bi plus people? And then I realized that it's not even that intentional, that we are so binary in our thinking that we erase all kinds of complexities. And just realizing that in the US, like we have so many other binaries as well. The racial binary in the US, still to this day in most parts of this country, is black and white, which leaves out like huge amounts of people. The political binary, Democrat, Republican, leaves out huge amounts of people, left, right, liberal, conservative, which actually leaves out the entire left as the middle and the right. I'm seeing some people going, oh yes, oh my God. I mean, so I think just understanding that binary thinking obstructs our vision. And I have those pictures of magnets next to it because it's not like you can just say, oh, binary thinking, that's silly. I'm not going to do that anymore. I really believe that binaries are these constant, ever-present magnets that pull our brains out of nuanced, deep, rich thinking and into stupid binaries. But for me, they explain so much of bisexual erasure, the idea that bisexuality isn't a real place, that it's just a stepping stone that people pass through, or that anyone who calls themselves that is just in denial, really straight, but denying that, or really gay, but denying that. Binaries are awful. Related to this as well is something that I call a dynamic that I call the tip of the iceberg, which is that when we meet people, we read them. We read them and we make all kinds of judgments about who we are. We assign age, we assign race, we assign sexual orientation, we assign gender. We just do all kinds of stuff without even thinking about it. And when we meet someone, we assign their sexual orientation based on what we know about their partner. So if somebody is in a mixed gender relationship, notice I didn't say opposite. If someone's in a mixed gender or a different gender relationship, we just assume that they're straight. If someone's in a same gender relationship, we just assume that they're gay. And when do we see bisexual people? When do people notice bisexuality? In the chat, just a few people, go ahead. When does bisexuality become visible in relationships? Pornography? Threesomes? If they're also poly, only when explicitly stated, they share that information, poly relationships. Got it. Sexual experimentation, when you scream it. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Only when a person goes from dating one gender to the other. Exactly. And I think that this dynamic explains also a lot of the stereotypes, because bisexual people, like I've actually been with my wife now, we're in season 24 of our rom-com. people who don't know us, who just see us, probably think they're seeing two lesbians, a lesbian couple, which they read as two lesbians. If I had a male partner instead, people would think I was straight. Right, and someone wrote just gals being pals, because a lot of women couples don't even get read as couples because people think they're just friends, because women are allowed to be physically affectionate without it signifying anything. Anyway, so a lot of the stereotypes about bisexuality are about threesomes and polyamory and being left by someone for someone of a different gender and so on and so forth. And what I want to say about that is, are some bisexual people into threesomes? Of course, just like some straight people, just like some lesbian and gay people. Are bisexual people polyamorous? Sure, some of us are, just like some straight people, just like some lesbians or gay people. Do bisexual people leave someone for someone else? Sure, just like some straight people, just like some lesbians or gay people. So what I'm saying is not that, oh, no, we're not like that, because I don't want to do that negative, like sex negative thing. What I'm saying is that that's not a definitional characteristic of being bisexual. But because that's the only time people see us, people think that that's a definitional characteristic of being bisexual. Number 4, using the hand raising tool, raise your hand if you got a great education, a great and comprehensive education about LGBTQ plus people through your high school curriculum. Stop laughing. I'm not seeing a lot of hands going up here. I think it's pretty obvious, isn't it? Snort, someone wrote, I went to Catholic school, someone wrote, I was laughing. Yeah, so that's one thing. People are not given a great information through their official curriculum. And even in college, if you study women and gender studies, then yeah, you'll probably get a great education. But if you're studying something else like chemistry or math or ancient Greek history, or, well, maybe not that one, lots of other topics, you may not even get a whole lot of information about this even through your college curriculum. And so I just try to remember that people don't have good information, not because they're horrible, horrible people, but because most people haven't had access to good information. And when people say things that are just hurtful, I try not to feel so personally hurt by it. I try to remember that it's very likely ignorance speaking. And it makes me a lot less angry and a lot more kind. And then the last thing is specifically addressing the dynamics that happen within the LGBTQ plus community. Use the hand raising tool and raise your hand if you've ever heard a lesbian or gay person say something negative or dismissive about a bi plus person. Oh, the hands are going up. Okay, you're filling up my whole screen here. Put your hands down. Now do it again. Raise your hand if you've ever heard a lesbian, gay, or bi person say something mean or dismissive about a trans or non-binary person. I think I'm getting the message. Yep, you're filling up my screen again. Put your hands down. Now raise your hand if you're familiar with the bi versus pansexual debate, the bisexual versus pansexual debate, which one word we should all use. Yeah, okay, put your hands down. And I'm not going to ask you to put your hands up, but this also plays out sometimes within the trans community about trans people and non-binary people. It plays out in all kinds of different ways. And I just try to remember that that is often pain speaking. There's a concept in sociology or psychology, maybe both, horizontal hostility, horizontal oppression. It's the idea that when people are feeling the pain of expression, they often take that pain out laterally on other people in their own community who may be slightly more marginalized than they are, instead of getting mad at the oppressor. Part of it's because, like, where is the oppressor? Where is the heteropatriarchy, right? I don't know, it's somewhere, it's everywhere, but it's hard to really go at it because it is everywhere. So I think when I hear lesbian or gay people saying some of the negative, dismissive things about bi plus people, I try to remember that that may be pain speaking. And by the way, that doesn't excuse it. Explaining something is not the same as excusing it, because there is no excuse. So, but I think it helps me not take it personally. And I like sharing these things with other bi+ people, because I really believe that for me, this understanding of these 5 things has created what I consider my personal biphobia shield. It means that it doesn't mean that these stereotypes don't keep coming in at me. It means that they don't hurt me in the same way that they used to. It means that 97% of the time, I'm able to deflect it. It's like a anti-biphobia raincoat or something. Like most of what happens doesn't get under my skin and doesn't hurt me and doesn't make me feel terrible. Sometimes it still does, but mostly I can say, oh, that's just binary thinking, or, oh, that's just our sex negativity, or that's just hurt people. Like that just helps me not be so hurt all the time. So I love sharing this with students because I really do think it's a protective tool. Now, next topic. I just want to share a couple of concepts that I think help me a lot in my thinking about these topics. One is minority stress, which comes from psychology, from Ilan Meyer. But the main focus of minority stress, I'm going to say this in really clear language. Minority stress is the idea that being a member of a stigmatized minority identity group is stressful. Minority stress. And when people are under stress, they respond to that stress in all kinds of different ways. You know, one is just like lots of anxiety, like anticipating the stress, experiencing the stress, like all that stuff that happens. And this is, I think this is really important when we're thinking about the experiences of LGBTQ+ young people. And also people in any stigmatized identity group, whether it be race, whether it be disability, whether it be immigration status, etc. Now, you can't actually measure minority stress in any kind of direct way. You can't say, let me take your pulse and measure your minority stress. It's not that simple. But you can measure minority stress in 2 ways, because when people are under stress, they engage in coping behaviors like cigarette smoking, alcohol consumption, drug use, self-harm, etc., suicidality. Those are all manifestations of minority stress. So you can actually measure minority stress in the prevalence of these coping behaviors. You can also measure minority stress in another way, which is down the road, the long-term impact of stress is that it affects our health. And if you look at almost every stigmatized identity group, you will find hypertension, diabetes, and other health issues, which I believe is a long-term impact of minority stress. Second concept that I think is essential to this topic, I don't think you can talk about identity without doing so through an intersectional framework. For those who are not familiar, intersectionality is a concept that comes from Black feminist thought. It comes from the writing, teaching, and thinking of Black feminists. It goes back at least to the 1970s is when I first saw the idea by a different word. The concept intersectionality was coined about 3 decades ago by a legal scholar named Kimberly Crenshaw. And she was talking about the impact of having multiple stigmatized identities. And specifically, she was talking about the experience of Black women. And she said that they have a specific experience because they are both Black and women, and that that's a different experience than Black men have, and a different experience than women of any other racial identity have. And that's intersectionality. And underneath the understanding of intersectionality is just the idea that all of us have multiple identities. We are not just our sexual orientation. We are not just our gender. We are not just our race. We are all of the things we are all together. We are our geographic, like where we come from. We are our religious or spiritual, background and current practice. We're all these things simultaneously. And I think it's really important to understand that every single one of our identities is shaped and impacted by every other one of our identities. Disparities data. So what does the data show? I'm not going to give you all the data. I'm just going to give you a couple quick points here. Heterosexual people have the best health in relation to sexual orientation. Surprise, surprise. Now, the one underneath it, though, I think is actually surprising, because I think that most people who aren't bisexual would say that, well, bisexual people don't experience oppression, or if they do, maybe they're just half oppressed. So maybe they experience 50% oppression. So maybe they'd be in the middle, but that's actually not what the data is showing. The data shows that in many ways, bi plus people have outcomes similar to lesbian and gay people. And in some areas, we actually have poorer health outcomes. And specifically, compared to heterosexuals, bi plus people report higher rates of tobacco use, binge drinking, anxiety and mood disorders, depression, suicidality, and rape. And in 4 of those areas, binge drinking, anxiety and mood disorders, suicidality, and rape, we actually have higher rates than lesbian or gay men. Again, a lot of people would be very surprised by this. Actually, I'm going to go really quickly through this, just that I'm actually not even going to show these slides. I'm going to talk about them in a second. Okay, so just about the suicidality slides, again, only recently have they started to disaggregate bisexual from lesbian and gay. And what they found was that bisexuals do not fall midpoint between heterosexuals and gay and lesbian people. We are up there with lesbian and gay people, and actually a tiny bit higher. HRC, Human Rights Campaign, did a survey of youth. And what they found was that only 4% of bi plus youth report that they're out to all of their teachers, compared to 9% of lesbian and gay youth. Only 19% of bi plus youth report that they're out to all of their parents, compared to 29% of lesbian and gay youth. 58% of bi plus youth report that they're out to their LGBTQ friends, compared to 68% of lesbian and gay youth. And again, like, it's not a huge difference here, but bi plus youth are less likely to be out. I am coming back to interpartner violence. Someone just wrote that in the chat. I will come to that. Outness. I'm going to skip this slide too, to get a chance to go to the other stuff. I want to just quickly address this, which is the idea that of experience suppression, like, why would bi plus youth have higher rates, higher indicators of minority stress? I think that part of it is that we're getting flack from the mainstream community, just like lesbian and gay people do, but we're also getting it from lesbian and gay people. So for many bi people, there is no safe space. There is no place where you can go and really feel fully 100% welcome. There are some bi plus groups, but most youth don't have access to that. Most young people don't know about those groups or have access to them. So they may be getting teased from every direction and disrespected from every direction. And also, I think that idea that bi plus people have it easier. When you're experiencing minority stress and someone tells you that you're not, I don't know about other people, but for me, that actually makes me feel more stressed. That kind of gaslighting makes me feel worse. It doesn't, like, I don't think, oh, okay, then I'm not experiencing stress. Like, it makes me feel even more stressed because I'm having an experience and it is being denied and devalued. And that just shoots me through the roof of stress. So the question, one of the questions I think is really interesting is, like, why? I believe that lesbian and gay and bi young people have very similar experiences of oppression in many ways, but they're obviously not identical. So the question that I would put out is, like, what are the unique challenges? And I just want to quickly read these. So besides all the negative stereotypes, we're told that it's easy to identify as bi, and that ours is not a serious or political identity. That one just makes me furious. Another form of gaslighting. The idea that bi plus folks have a harder time finding resources, community, and safe space. And that's actually, there's some data that backs that up, including from the HRC. Having constant and repeated challenges to our identities, it is exhausting. And just want to say one more thing about that. Like, people say, it's like, if you come out as lesbian or gay, or if you come out as straight, what you do not get to hear every year is, well, I know you said you were gay last year. Are you still gay? I know you said you were straight last year. Are you still straight? For bi plus folks, you don't just come out once, you have to come out over and over and over, because people don't understand that as a stable and permanent identity. The idea of representation, that there are so few positive representations of bi plus people, that is improving. It's definitely improving in the last few years, but we have a long way to go. And then I'm going to talk about this one in a minute, primary and secondary perceived relationship threats. So I'm going to skip that for now. Bi plus folks challenge our cultural urge to put things into simple binaries. And that makes other people squirmy sometimes. And having people tell you that you don't exist is not a good feeling. So now somebody had asked a question about this, about sexual violence. This is some data about sexual violence from the Center for Disease Control. Actually, this is also from the CDC. This is the from the YRBS study. What they found was that 9% of the heterosexual youth reported having experienced sexual violence by anyone during the 12 months prior to the survey. Gay and lesbian was 13.5%. Bisexual was 23.8%. And so far, the data that I've seen on this topic for different age groups all shows that bi folks have higher rates of sexual violence. And so I wanted to put out a question to you, which is, what could explain these higher rates of sexual violence? Somebody also wrote, and even higher if you identify as BIPOC or trans, that absolutely intersectionality, right? Because the more stigmatized identities you hold, the higher the stress, the higher the stigma, the higher the volume of garbage that you are dealing with. Okay, now, people thinking they can scare them straight, lack of respect, fear and hate, fear, the hypersexualization of bi plus people, power and control, trying to turn somebody gay or straight, the presumption that bi plus folks are hypersexualized. Yes, coming out to a partner who anticipates you to be in the binary, oppression, less support, more vulnerability, and corrective rape, targets, lacking community support, perceived hypersexuality, fear of having power of control, people sexualizing bisexuality, corrective rape, barriers to safety, highly sexualized stereotypes, insecurities, miseducation, and fear. Bi women as sexual objects, even more so than straight women, more fear, silence, and oppression. I'm going to stop reading after the next two. I don't know what's after that just because for time, but you're all saying you're saying everything that I would agree with. People assuming bisexual people are more sexual, therefore more likely to want whatever they're pressuring them to do. And by the way, bisexual people have 48 hours in every day too, so we can have twice as much sex. It's a hardly known fact. The more layers of oppression you add, the higher the occurrence of violence, challenge to masculinity or femininity. Whoa, okay. Yes, all those things. And I want to just emphasize a couple of them. One is the idea that bi plus identity is seen as a sexual invitation. The first man I ever came out to as bi, his response was, "Oh, that's cool. I'd love to watch." Our relationship ended about a week after that. Hypersexualization of bi plus people, which was mentioned many times. Substance use. If you're using substances at a higher rate because you're under more stress, that can also weaken your protective devices, right? Because you may be more vulnerable if you're drunk or if you're high. And I want to now talk about perceived relationship threat. This is something that I've never seen in a book, but I think I made it up. I made up something that I call primary and secondary perceived relationship threat. Primary relationship threat is the idea, oh, you're bisexual. I know you're going to leave me. I know you're going to cheat on me. I know I can't trust you because you're going to leave me for someone of fill in a different gender, right? That whole idea that being bisexual, being in a relationship with someone bisexual is in fact insecure, threatening, unsafe, that they're going to leave you for someone else, they're going to cheat, etc. Secondary relationship threat is the idea coming from someone saying, for example, that, oh, I'm cool with you being bi, but don't say anything to my friends. Don't tell my friends because they wouldn't understand, or don't tell my parents or my siblings because they wouldn't understand. So it's the idea of the fear of your identity being damaging to your partner because of other people in their lives not understanding bisexuality. So I think that's a real thing too. And I think that all these things, everything you wrote in the chat and the things I just said, I think really can explain the higher rates of sexual violence that are inflicted on bi+ people. I want to quickly talk about the idea of like the specific experiencing oppression as a bi+ people, a bi+ person. Every time I meet a new person, I have to decide whether, when, and how to disclose. And this is true of anyone having an invisible identity that's not read through, just like interacting with me in person. If I don't disclose, I know I'm going to be misread, which I may care about. If I don't disclose, I may feel guilty for not speaking up. I may feel somehow that I am dissembling, even though other people are just making assumptions about me. I may feel responsible for that, for those misassumptions. Disclosure makes me vulnerable, and it may put me at risk for teasing, hypersexualization, mistrust, rejection, or physical harm. So the fear that disclosure might have its actual material costs. And also the idea that disclosure is often received as inappropriate or aggressively thrusting my sexuality into other people's faces. The number of straight people who have said to me, I don't go around telling people I'm straight. Why do you have to go around telling people you're bi? Well, the answer to that, of course, is that straight people don't have to go around telling people they're straight because their heterosexuality is already assumed. But for bi+ folks, it's often perceived as, again, a sexual invitation or just inappropriate sexualization or bringing sexuality inappropriately into the classroom, the workplace, the job, or whatever. So I want to go to some positive stuff. I have a few slides just with some positive things that you as individuals can do. And then we're going to have a little bit of time left over for Q&A and comments, which I welcome. So what does bi+ inclusion look like? So just some best practices. These are all personal best practices. Set aside your expectations and assumptions. Good luck with that, but try. Understand the difference between sexual orientation and sexual behavior. If someone comes out to you as bisexual, you know nothing about their sexual history or about their current sexual behavior or about whether they're in a relationship. All you know is how they identify. Understand the difference and the complex interactions between sexual identity and gender identity. Understand that there are numerous sexual orientation identities and gender identities, including some with which you may not be familiar. If someone uses an identity that you don't know, that you're not familiar with, consider politely asking them to tell you what it means. I'm not talking about a stranger on the street necessarily, but if someone you know tells you how they identify, even if you do think you know what it means, it might be a very smart thing to ask them to tell you more about what it means. When someone comes out to me, I thank them because coming out is a brave act and it's an act of trust. People don't just come out accidentally or easily. When someone comes out to you, they've probably thought about it a great deal, assessed the potential risks, and decided you're worth the risk. So thank them because they just gave you an act of trust. And secondly, don't necessarily understand that even if it's a word that you think you know what it means, if you ask 100 people who identify as bisexual exactly what that word means, you will get multiple different answers. Same thing true for queer, same thing true for lesbian or gay or pansexual or straight for that matter. These are all very big words that hold a lot of potential meanings. Know that bi+ youth experience disparities overlapping with but different from heterosexuals and also from lesbians and gay men. Understand that bi+ people in different gender relationships still face health, mental health, safety, and social disparities. Understand that individual bisexuals have unique experiences that intersect with other aspects of their identity. Intersectionality, baby. Remember that people may be afraid to come out to you and do everything you can to make them feel safe, not judged. How about actions? Just got 2 slides full of those. Use inclusive language. I do not like to hear the term lesbian relationship. or gay family, or gay marriage, same gender marriage, same gender relationship, LGBTQ plus family. Because if you use those shorthand terms, you're making it can be perceived that you're making assumptions about the people inside those families or inside those relationships. Identify people accurately. If someone tells you an identity word, use that word. Mirror that word back to them. Don't call them something else. That may seem obvious, but people do this all the time. Read up on bisexuality so you can respond to Bi Plus Youth in a manner that's both respectful and informed. Do some homework. Visuals. When I go into someone's office, I read their office. I look to see what's on their bulletin board, what's taped onto their door, what books they have in their bookshelf. And that often helps me determine whether somebody is someone I could trust or not. So if you want to be perceived as someone who is trustworthy, then put stuff up on your door, put stuff up on your wall, put stuff up on your bulletin board. It's a great way to do kind of passive support work. Just like give messages with your visuals. Develop Bi Plus specific trainings, flyers, publication, Bi Plus curriculum or modules. If you're doing an LGBTQ plus training, make sure there's a specific Bi Plus module within that training. I have some slides at the end, some listing of resources at the end. Look up some of those resources. September 23rd is Celebrate Bisexuality Day. That week before and or after it is Bi Visibility Week. The month is Bi Visibility Month. It is a great month to do Bi Plus programming. March is Bisexual Health Month. See, bisexuals get 2 months. March is Bisexual Health Month. And there's all kinds of great stuff on social media under the hashtag Bi Health Month. It's also a great time to do programs, bring in speakers, do stuff like that. And then there's May 24th is Pansexual and Pan-Romantic Awareness and Visibility Day. Another time, even though it's after classes end, unfortunately, another opportunity to do visibility work. And during those months, you can post stuff on the social media. You can do all kinds of educational posts, all kinds of passive programming, posters, signs, whatever, to raise awareness on these topics. But don't just do it in September or March. Do it all year long. Look at your website and your printed materials. This is for folks who have LGBTQ plus programs or centers or groups. Just make sure that they're fully inclusive in language and representation. Offer specific programming directed toward Bi Plus Youth. Make it abundantly clear that Bi Plus Youth are welcome. You may mean to welcome us, but we may not feel welcome. We may not know that. So do extra work to make it clear that we are welcome, because Bi Plus people often feel like they're liminal, like they're marginalized, like they're outsiders, like they're maybe or maybe not welcome. So you need to do extra outreach. Just in general, interrupt binary thinking of all kinds. It happens all the time. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen in LGBTQ plus youth. It needs to be interrupted. It needs to be changed. Work with LGBTQ plus student leaders to help set a tone that is more fully inclusive. And just generally don't have out people who are representative, who are role models. Like that should be a factor in hiring, just the idea of like having those kinds of diversities in representation. Don't assume people's sexual orientations or gender identities. And also just in general, when you're thinking about the needs of LGBTQ plus youth and Bi plus youth specifically, just always keep in mind that they're growing up in a different historical moment than you did. And this is true even if you're 22 years old now. It's different for 18-year-olds right now than it was when you were 18. And I try so hard to always hold that in my mind. The floor is open. And so the way we can do this is you can either write stuff in the chat. And actually, I'm going to ask Elizabeth, if you would look at the chat and like anything that needs to be said out loud, just also say it out loud. And then also you're welcome to use the hand raising tool to make a comment, because I'd love to, we'll unmute you and we'd love to hear your actual voices and see your beautiful faces, because we can do that. So go ahead, any comments, questions, thoughts?
I mean, I feel like all of these are worthwhile to read out loud. They're all just extremely positive. And I'm not sure, actually, 4 minutes ago, a question did come in. Is the term same sex obsolete or headed in that direction? I've gotten mixed messages on that.
I tend to use same gender. And again, what's obsolete really depends on the circles. I often, like even the question, like, do you use LGBT or LGBTQ or LGBTQ plus or LGBTQIA plus or LGBTQI? It depends where you are. There's no right answer to that. And same thing with same sex, same gender. I think that I used to say sex and or gender when talking about all this stuff, but now I tend to lean more toward just gender. But in some places, sex is still the dominant language. It really depends.
Absolutely. There are some folks wondering if you could share your resource page afterwards with folks as well.
Yeah, if I do I have it in this? I'm actually not actually. I can send it out to folks. If anybody wants to receive stuff, put your email in the chat and I will send you a whole page full of stuff, which I will look at before I do, and I'll update it and make sure it's current because stuff changes so quickly. Ooh, baby, look at all those emails. Other questions and comments? Use your hand raising function, might be the easiest way to do that right now.
These are a lot of emails.
Okay, in that case, I wanted to take another, can we have like 3 more minutes?
Yeah, there's another question, if you don't mind.
Yes, go ahead.
Why do you think that researchers stay away from talking about these issues based on diverse communities, bisexuality in the Black community versus others, et cetera?
Why do I think researchers stay away from talking about things like bi+ identities in Black communities?
It looks like that's the question.
Oh my God. Well, actually, it's interesting. I just want to say about that. There's actually some data that shows that Black identified people are more likely to identify as bi than white identified people. Black and Latina, Latinx people are higher than white and Asian API people, or AAPI, or whatever the, again, same thing, like the initials depend who you're talking to and where you are, but there is some data that shows there's actually a difference there. Why do people stay away from it? I don't know. I wish they wouldn't. I think that we need to talk about all this stuff. We need to puzzle it out. We need to stop. We need to disaggregate bi+ people from lesbian and gay people. So many studies just eliminate bi+ people who aren't clearly one binary or the other because it's inconvenient data. We need to focus a light on the middle. We need to focus resources. We need to focus attention. We need to, right now, bi+ people get less than 1% of all LGBTQ+ specific, any identity within the LGBTQ+ funding community. Funding that's identity specific, for example, toward lesbian or intersex or trans people, bi+ people get less than 1% of that funding. We are barely even on the pie chart. We're at like a little line that you can barely see. I think we need to focus a lot more light, a lot more resources, a lot more research, and a lot more programming into these communities, because in fact, we are more than 50% of all LGBTQ+ people. And for even younger people, the non-binary sexualities are a vast majority. And so they need our attention.
It looks like another question came in that just got moved. What are your thoughts on using queer as an umbrella term? For example, queer relationship versus same gender relationship?
My thoughts on that, again, I'm gonna stop share. Hi. I think that, again, that's a geographic question. It depends on the place. It depends on the context. Some people, older people, especially older men, often perceive the word queer as a word that's been used as a weapon against them. Younger folks are much more comfortable with that term on average. There are geographic differences in how these terms are used. I spoke once if you go to Smith College or Purchase, queer is going to be everywhere, right? It's going to be ubiquitous everywhere. I spoke at the University of Alabama about 5 years ago, and I did my Beyond Binaries program, which is one where we do an anonymous survey of ourselves. And only one person out of 140 people present self-identified as queer in that group. And I was shocked. But that's a geographic and regional difference. And again, it may be different there now 5 years later, because a lot of what words we use, depending on the specific people who surround us, we get our language from our peers. And so what's true 1 year may not be true 5 years later.
And if folks did submit a question already that I didn't read out loud, feel free to resend it or send it to me directly, because we definitely don't want to miss you. There have just been a lot of chats that popped up. This is a very,
It's amazing.
in an amazing way, a really active chat, which is wonderful to see.
Someone just wrote, so my niece identifies as bisexual, but also used the term gay to describe herself. That's the idea of identities more as adjectives, so you can use multiple labels. My experience from my Beyond Binaries, anonymous surveys, is that is, so it seems like these days a majority of LGBTQ plus or queer or whatever word you want to use, youth, use multiple simultaneous labels. That's not true for straight identified youth. And what I've seen over time is that the percentage of people using multiple identities is going up. It's increasing.
It looks as though the chat is at a slow point. So I want to take this time to just say thank you so much for all of this wonderful insight that you've shared with us today, for your time. Thank you, Jarima, for joining us to convene this session. Always exciting to have Purchase represented, including alumni and folks who currently work there. Thank you to all of you for being so active today. This is, we really miss having the live version of Spectrum, but being able to see folks in the chat being this active is, it's really rewarding to us. We will be back here at 1:30 for our next session, and we hope that you'll all come back and join us. Robyn, I pulled all the emails to share with you from this chat. I can email that to you. But so thank you, everyone. We'll leave this open while we're on break. So you can continue. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Can I say one more quick thing, which is that
Sure.
If anybody wants to see my programs again or more, I am a campus speaker. And I am back in the saddle, both digitally and in person. Ready to go.
Well, thank you. We will see you all back here at 1:30, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much.